Hey, everybody. Guy here from Chit Chat Podcast. Thank you so much for continuing to listen. This continues to be such a fun place to meet people and talk and get to know what's happening in our community. Today's conversation was really fun and interesting. Linda Allen from Quiet Oaks Hospice came on. We talked about what is hospice, what kinds of things do people think about, or what kinds of things should they be thinking about as they approach end of life. And the unique thing about that is that we don't know when we're going to die. And so we should maybe be having more of those conversations now. Having some of those hard conversations is a way that we can love our families, the people in our lives who we will inevitably leave behind. And so we had that conversation, or a piece of that conversation. And I sure hope that as you listen to this, that maybe you would be encouraged to jump off from this conversation that you'll hear Linda and I have in a second, and maybe have some of those conversations with your loved ones. So thanks again for being a part of this community. And again, Chit Chat, we're not trying to solve any of the world's problems. I'm trying to have conversations with the people in central Minnesota that are doing their part to make it just a little bit better. And Linda and her team at Quiet Oaks are doing just that. So thanks for continuing to listen and for continuing to support us. Thanks, everybody. Linda, thank you so much for coming and joining us on the podcast.
Really happy to be here. Thanks.
Just introduce yourself. Tell us who you are and what you do.
I'm Linda Allen. I am a grandmother and a mother. And I take great pride in being the best Gigi. That's what my grandkids call me, Gigi.
That's a good one.
I work for an organization called Quiet Oaks Hospice House and Respite Care. And we are a nonprofit organization here in St. Cloud. And I've been with the organization almost 10 years now.
Sweet. Tea, I forgot. We're drinking a little tea here, a little spot of tea in the afternoon.
I am the executive director over at Quiet Oaks. So wonderful. I have the great privilege and honor of working with a most amazing team over there.
That's sweet.
Incredible people.
Linda, one of the reasons that I wanted to have you on, your presentation at Chamber Connection, for those of you who don't know, the local area chamber, we meet every Friday morning. There are lots of different things that the chamber does, but on Friday mornings we meet. And a different person hosts every time. And I have been to more chamber events than I think I can count. I mean, tons. And I can count on one hand probably the amount of chamber events that I have active memory of. And your presentation was so good. And I was thankful for all the people in the room that they got to experience what you said. I think it was encouraging and challenging and convicting in the right kinds of ways, a good motivation to maybe talk about death and end of life thing in a kind of way that we just don't naturally do as a people. And so it was that reason that I was someday, it'd be really sweet if Linda could be
awesome
on the podcast. So I'm
excited to do this because I do think it's something we need to have conversations about. It's important stuff.
Maybe just jump in case people don't know what is hospice and how is it different than a nursing home?
So in hospice, we're providing quality end-of-life care. And it's how we care for somebody. It's not necessarily the place where we care for them because people can get hospice at home. They can also receive hospice in a nursing home. So hospice is the type of care. And it's that we look at someone holistically. So we're not just looking at Mrs. Jones who has cancer, but we're looking at Margaret who has children and grandchildren, who had a hobby of gardening, who really enjoyed her job working at the floral store, who has a whole life story. In doing so, we're addressing her physical needs, but we also look at her emotional, her spiritual, psychological, and social needs. And all of those things make us who we are. Statistically, they say that people with a life-limiting illness who are placed on hospice actually live longer than people without hospice care. And I think the reason for that is that because we see them in their totality, not a person with a sickness, but we see them in their wholeness, their bigness of life, people thrive. It's like we see them as more than just a disease. And it gives people a chance to kind of explore that part of themselves and lean into that. And don't we all like to talk about ourselves? I mean, share about who we are and what makes us tick and what matters and what's important. And so I think that gives people a little bit of a lease on life and a chance to explore and delve into that themselves. And the reason for that is because there aren't many.
Sure. Okay.
There are very few residential hospices in the state of Minnesota. There are roughly 10, and the number declines because it's hard to keep them open. It's financially difficult. Quiet Oaks is an organization that got its start in 2008. It was started by the community, for the community, and it exists today because of wonderful community support. If we didn't have the support of Central Minnesota, of the wonderful people that live here, the people who have been served by Quiet Oaks, who pay it forward to help other people, we would not exist today. Because the cost of healthcare at end of life is so expensive. If we asked people to foot the bill themselves for all of that, they couldn't afford to do it. 30% of every stay at Quiet Oaks is funded by the generosity of our community.
That's high.
It is. Because Medicare doesn't pay for what we provide. That room and board cost is paid privately out of pocket.
Yep.
The cost at Quiet Oaks is $645 a day. That's expensive. That's a lot of money. I will tell you that people believe that they have longer time than they do. So most people over-anticipate the needs or the cost that will be. But it is an important level of care that we provide. And not only do we provide that to the person who is facing end of life, but we provide a special care to their family.
Yeah.
Hospice, the root word hospice, is part of hospitality. And so it's this hospitality of providing care to the family, support to the family, that's as important as it is to the patient, what we're doing for the patient. And to be honest, when patients come to Quiet Oaks, their biggest worry isn't, will I be in pain, or where do I go from here? What will it be like? Their biggest worry is their family. Will my family be okay? Are they going to be all right without me? And when they can see that their loved ones are in a supportive environment with people who care about them and love them and will help support them through this, I think individuals become more relaxed and they really have the ability to feel okay about that next step and to be able to take that journey. So we are an 8-bed residential hospice. We provide care to people at end of life, people with terminal illnesses, people who have been given a diagnosis of living 6 months or less. That's a hospice diagnosis. An independent physician must determine that. We also see respite patients. So that would be like a short-term stay for someone whose loved ones, whose family members need a break, who have been, they've been helping, they've been caregiving. And the truth is most people want to die at home, right?
Yeah.
Statistically in the United States, I think they say about 80% of people who are surveyed say they want to die at home. But in the end, only about 30% actually do.
Wow.
So where do all the others go? They get on that proverbial hamster wheel of going and fighting whatever is ailing them, going to the hospital, going into recovery, going to the nursing home, bouncing around here, there, everywhere. And I think that's really unfortunate. Because what we hear in hospice at end of life is people telling us they're tired. They're tired of doing this, and they've been tired for a long time. But whether it's their family or the medical community that keeps encouraging this fight to keep going, keep trying, keep doing, without thinking about the quality of life. And that's what I want to challenge listeners to do. Think about what matters the most. What about the quality of your days? Not just how many days. Because we can live longer. I mean, there are treatments and cures and all kinds of machines that can keep us going. But is that what we really want? And that's a very personal and individual question. Everybody has to ask that themselves. What matters? And I think that's where we need to begin the conversation, is for people to think about what matters most to them. And in that, they can formulate whatever their plan is for end of life.
You said that we need to start thinking about those things, which I get and I believe. I think that we also need to have more conversations around those things too. Because I think if you just think about it and you don't have that conversation with your family and your loved ones, then when you get to the end, it can be maybe extra challenging. We just talk about that. Like, what are some of the things that you bump into on a regular basis in relationship to hard conversations around death and around end-of-life care that families kind of walk through.
We turn the other way when something's difficult or hard. Not often do we lean into it. And I say to families, I say to people in general, the best gift you can leave your family is directions and a health care directive that tells family members what your wishes are at end of life is really important because it lays out the map, the roadmap for what your plans are. They don't have to second guess or wonder.
Yeah.
When my mother asked if I would be her healthcare agent to comply with her healthcare wishes to carry them out, I said I would as long as my sisters could be part of that conversation and we all talked about those wishes together. Because I have seen at Quiet Oak circumstances and situations where the healthcare agent who is supposed to have the loudest voice and speak for their loved one gets overshadowed by other voices in the room. I've also seen cases where, for example, someone chooses as their healthcare agent multiple people. I want all my kids to decide. They should just talk about it. They'll get along. Everything will be fine. If you put 4 different people in a room and ask them to make a determination about a loved one's wishes, that might not be easy to comply with.
If everyone's responsible, nobody's responsible.
It makes it a lot more difficult. And I will tell you this, it's difficult for many people to disconnect the head and the heart. And so the ability to choose wisely, someone who you think can follow through with your wishes, even when it might be hard.
Yeah.
And that might mean that you don't choose a spouse or you don't choose a child. Maybe you choose somebody who's a little bit more removed. And then you talk about it.
Yeah.
You make sure that those wishes are outlined. If you go to fill out a healthcare directive, and by the way, you can do those free online. You don't need a notary. People are all hung up that I have to have it notarized. It doesn't have to be. But it's a good roadmap to start the conversation. In the middle section of a healthcare directive, there's often a part that talks about my hopes and wishes. And it really does allow you in the quiet moments of a day to take some time to think about what's it going to be like?
Yeah.
When it's my final day, where will I be? Who will be with me? What are the things I'll hear? What are the smells I'll smell? People can choose favorite playlists, or at Quiet Oaks, we use aromatherapy. So we have aromatherapy in a room. Well, what if your favorite scent is not the one we're using and instead we're pumping in lavender and you don't like lavender? Is that your favorite?
No. I was thinking of what would I
not want?
Yeah. I think I'm supposed to like lavender more, but I'm not sure I do. Anyway.
Supposed to have a calming effect, but not for everybody.
Yeah.
But you have to have what you like.
Yeah.
And you get to choose if you tell people. But if you don't, we don't always know. I mean, same with music. You have a musical playlist, I have mine, and our two might be very different.
Yeah.
But when you're lying there, what songs do you want to be able to hear?
Yeah.
Or maybe you don't want songs.
Right.
Maybe you want quietude. And, at Quiet Oaks, there is a lot of quiet. People get to that stage in life. And what we see with people at end of life is that they really do start changing. Their journey begins months before death occurs. At least when it's not a sudden, an unplanned event. Because people start to shut down in ways. And in a lot of ways, it isn't always even in a physical sense, but there's a disconnecting that happens. People withdraw a little bit. They become less involved in the things of this world. If they liked watching television or listening to music or, doing the crossword puzzle or reading or whatever their interests were, they start to show less and less interest. And they become a little quieter, more introspective, a little withdrawn, and you can start to see some changes. And then other changes occur as far as sleep and eating. They tend to sleep more and they eat less. And you see this pattern happening. And over the course of time, the body starts to shut down too. But there's a lot of signs and symptoms, things that we can watch for and know that are occurring. Just like with birth and, people have childbirth and they go to labor and delivery classes and they know that there's a transition time and things that are going to happen and occur. Well, the same is true in death.
Yeah.
We have these different phases and things that take shape. And when they do, we can help families prepare because we see it's coming.
Yeah.
A lot of times we don't have to help the patient so much because they know. We know how to die. Our bodies know how to die. And dying isn't painful. Dying isn't a painful process. Diseases that are uncontrolled can be painful and uncomfortable. And that's why we do comfort care at end of life. So nurses are trained to deal with symptom management and to provide comfort for things that, there could be some agitation or restlessness that can occur, but the dying process isn't a painful thing. And so people can do that quite naturally and quite beautifully, frankly. And having the ability to be bedside and witness that several times over in my career, I would just say, I like to think of it as being the closest we can to heaven's doorstep, being in that presence, in that moment when somebody passes over that threshold is a pretty amazing thing. It's pretty powerful stuff.
Yeah. My family had the opportunity to experience Quiet Oaks in 2019 at the kind of end of the year. Actually, it was, so my grandma ended up at Quiet Oaks. And it was like Thanksgiving, Christmas time.
Okay.
Which you don't need me to tell you, but it's like extra pretty out there.
Yeah.
Fresh snow on the ground, and just how quiet and warm, and it was
cozy, the
cozy.
Decorations, the trees.
Yeah. And so for that season that we were there, it was a really, really incredible time. Obviously, really hard, saying goodbye to grandma. To have such a really peaceful place to kind of like walk through some of that was really, really great. Some of my favorite. Like I would go just in the afternoon, and sometimes I'd just bring a book. She slept a lot. And,
Yeah.
there were times when I didn't communicate with her at all, but I just would go and sit and, half for her, just if she woke up or whatever, that I could have a nice little conversation with her. But I think at least half for me too, just a quiet place to sit out there and remember her and read a book and kind of just be comforted a little bit. So
Yeah.
My family got to experience the blessing of Quiet Oaks. And then my grandma she did not die there. She, we thought that she was really close to the end. And apparently this is like a little bit of a thing, I guess, but she got there and off all of the, so many of the medications, and just like in that kind of weaning process on her way to dying, she like rebounded a little bit. And
she was a graduate of Quiet Oaks.
Yeah, a graduate.
We have those. Yeah. And you're right. What happens sometimes is, depending on a disease, like take, for example, cancer. If patients are doing chemo and radiation, we know those things take a toll on a body. And when you take that out of the body, you do see people get a little more energy, they have an appetite, they have this kind of a rebound situation. Or in some cases, if individuals are home independently trying to navigate, are they taking the medications on time? Are they eating right? Are they hydrating? If they fail to do some of those things, it can just take them off their game, so much so that they can spiral for a little bit. We can get them plateaued or back to a point where they can be level again and managing. Obviously, with cancer patients, the cancer will progress. If we stop the treatment, most likely that cancer progresses and that disease goes on. But there are patients who have graduated, have more living to do, or in some cases, as families said, got love back to health and now are ready to go and do more living. In my memory, there was a woman who was with us over 2 years.
That feels like, is that a really long time?
Yes, like for hospice it is. Our longest was over 3 years.
Okay.
But this particular woman lived with us 2 years, 8 months, and 16 days. And it sticks in my mind as a date to remember because it was so significant.
Yeah.
And when she had been told that, she didn't need to be there any longer, that she could return home, she's like, but this is my home. At that point in time, Quiet Oaks felt like home to her. And she was such a part of that house. And to the staff, she was part of the family. It was very, very important to her to be part of it. But Dr. Lally and Joe Bauer, our previous director, said, no, it's time for you to go. And she did, got her own apartment, had a nice little party with the nurses. They had tea at her house one afternoon, and she just asked that we promise to save her a bed for when she came back. And she ended up, years later dying in her sleep. So she never needed us again. But that was the family that said their sister got love back to health. She just needed that for a period of time in her life and got better, know? Yeah.
It's really sweet. What kinds of questions, like are there specific things that families should be, conversations that people should be having with their loved ones or with themselves that you would recommend that people start?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it really is about what do you want? I mean, because we live in a very medicinized, society, there's no doubt that we can keep ourselves going longer. And I know with diseases, we can ask doctors, is there anything more we can do? And there almost always is an answer, yes. I think when our health declines or we start to have health issues, it's important to find out maybe less of, is there anything more we can do? When it's a terminal illness, the question might be, what would you do if it were your loved one? Because I think the answer for doctors might be different. And what I will tell you, we see oftentimes is that there is this awkward dance that occurs.
Yeah.
That when someone is ill, often the patient or the family are waiting for the doctor to open the door for this idea of, we don't have to keep doing this. And the doctor is waiting for the family to bring this up.
Yeah.
And in this, both parties do this very awkward thing and nobody talks about it. So I think, again, leaning in and embracing the conversation when there is an illness, when there's sickness occurring, when there's a deterioration of organs, when there's something not right with our body, what do we want to do?
Yeah.
To what extent or length will we go to fix it? What are the consequences and things you're willing to live with? And how long do you want to keep doing that?
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's just some personal reflection that everybody should do. And then to be able to converse with your family about what those wishes might be. Do you want to have CPR? Do you want a breathing tube? If you can't breathe for yourself, do you want a machine to breathe for you? For how long? If you can't eat for yourself, do you want to have artificial nutrition? Do you want to have a feeding tube? We just took care of a woman who had been on a feeding tube for 13 years. She fed herself through a machine. That's how she got nutrition. Other people would say, not for me.
Yeah.
I mean, my directive says if I can't feed myself, do not hand feed me.
Sure.
Because I've seen where people are kept alive, somebody's feeding them. But I've made a conscious decision that I don't want that
Yeah.
for me.
And with your healthcare directive, obviously that's something that's like written out, printed, like, you're in possession of that. Is that something that people should sit down, like before it's ever needed? Like right now, this is a conversation that you don't need to have. Someday you might need
Absolutely.
it. But like, should people sit down and say like, hey, in the event that this is tomorrow or a decade from now or 20 years from now, this is what I need you to know.
If you're 18 or older, you should have one.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is when I leave here today and I go out here, St. Germain Street,
Yeah.
if I got T-boned by someone to no fault of my own,
Yep.
doing nothing wrong,
Yep.
who's to say that my ability to communicate beyond that
Yeah.
is available to me? I don't know.
Yeah.
And if I can't share with anyone what I want, will my family know what to do for me?
Yeah.
That's what I hope for, is that each and every person, I mean, we all want to think we're going to live forever. We all want to think that it's not us. It'll never happen to us. It's always going to be somebody else that this happens to. But really, we have to consider the idea that it could be us any day.
Yeah.
And I've heard people say, well, I don't want to talk about that stuff because if I talk about it, it'll happen. That's superstitious thinking. Just because we talk about it, I think we need to be prepared and well-planned. And I also, again, go back to what I said at the beginning. The best gift we give to our family is the ability for them to know what our wishes are.
Yeah.
They don't have to wonder. They don't have to blame themselves. They don't have to second guess. I had a woman who made a decision to discontinue her mother's breathing life support. And in the end, her siblings stopped talking to her. They believe that she took mother's life.
Wow.
But what she did was she carried out her mother's wish, a wish that they had, a conversation they had together.
Yep.
But it had never been documented and shared with the rest of the family. So what she was doing was carrying out her mother's wish, but it didn't transfer over to the others. And the other cases that we've seen, I mean, hard cases at Quiet Oaks where maybe a family member did not comply with the wishes, did not do as mother asked. So mom had a stroke and there she is. They rush her to the hospital and the daughter says do everything possible.
Yep.
That was not mom's wish. Mom's wish was, let me go. I've lived a good life. No extraordinary measures. Let me go. When they did take her off the breathing tube and she came to, but could no longer live the life that she wanted, did not have the use of limbs that she had before, could not be independent, could not do those things, She was very angry with her family.
Yeah.
She was angry to be put in that position, but that is how she lived the rest of her life. And she carried that anger, and unfortunately, that affected their relationship.
Yeah.
So again, I think we can dispel a lot of those issues if we just are open and talking about it. And I think that exploring death and dying, I'm not afraid to die. If this was my last day, I'm ready. And I'm comfortable with the idea that where I go is better than the place I am today.
Agreed.
And I'm going to embrace that, and I'm going to lean into that. And I'd be hard-pressed, depending on the kind of diagnosis that I'm given. I have lots to live for, no doubt. But I'd be hard-pressed to really battle and fight hard on certain things where I know, because I see the consequences every day, how much that takes from people.
Yeah.
The living part gets diminished.
How much do you sacrifice of the time you have left to try to squeak out a few more days?
Absolutely.
I'm not saying that's an easy, for the people that navigate that, it's obviously not an easy answer, but I think that's the point of it. It's not easy. And so if it's
How
not,
to have hard conversations.
and if it's not easy for you,
Yeah.
if it's not easy for us to do individually for ourselves, how much more difficult will it be for people to make those decisions for us if we're unable to do it?
I want to say, too, I think, just that very conversation about the hard pieces, the hard conversation, and thinking about that with kids. I think parents need to decide when it's right to talk to kids about death and dying, but everything that lives dies.
Yeah.
Everything.
Yep.
We have teaching moments every single day. And whether that's the plants, whether that's the animals, earth around us, all those things, those are teaching moments. And I think parents need to use those moments to help kids not be afraid of death and dying. Because we can change, societally, we can change our views. If you go to third world countries, there are a lot of countries where cultures embrace death.
Yeah.
They do. They don't run from it. I mean, I say we go kicking and screaming to our graves. We literally do. It's not that way in a lot of countries. Yes, the wailing and the mourning comes after the fact, and people are grieving the loss of a loved one. But individuals embrace death and dying differently than we do here.
Yeah.
We really do, we run from it.
Yeah. I have a 10-year-old daughter. Her name's Lucy. And Lucy is one of the just the loveliest little souls I've ever met in my entire life. She asks good questions, and she's thoughtful and introspective at times. And she's a wonderful little person to have a conversation with. And she just brings these just incredible questions out of nowhere. Sometimes you just be driving, you think you're on your way to the grocery store to grab eggs, and then you're just deep in some really deep existential conversation. Her and I, we've been walking at night together, just putting our boots on in the cold and just going out for a 20 or 30 minute walk. So fun. And one of the last ones, just a couple days ago, her and I out for a walk. I don't know how it happened, but we got to life insurance. What is life insurance? And why do you need life insurance? And what's the purpose of life insurance? And I mean, the irony of talking about that actually jumped into these much bigger conversations about life and death.
Wow.
And she's 10. Do we just skirt past this because we're about to talk about dying? And I'm going to talk about I have life insurance, which means that I'm telling you, I'm preparing in some regard to die, and then she asked the questions, right? And so it's my little thing is if they're old enough to be asking these questions, I think they're old enough in an appropriate kind of way to give answers. Yeah. And so we just had a really fascinating conversation all about life and death. And then even just some of the practical things, which isn't a normal Lucy thing, just asking about kind of the nit and gritty of how insurance works and what do you do with the money. And anyway,
that's awesome.
But using some of those opportunities to have bigger and broader conversations about some of that. I have the joy of serving as an elder at my church, and people die. And there are lots of funerals that happen in our church. And when it's appropriate and right, I try to bring my kids to those funerals because I don't want them to have any sort of fear or stigma around death. I'd like them to be able to handle a conversation around death and the idea of death, and subsequently prepare for death in a way that is appropriate for a kid. But so
that's wonderful.
When I can, I try to bring them to that. Yeah. And the truth matters is those celebrations of life, they're some of the very best, the very, very best days.
I know.
Where people are thankful and they're happy. Of course they're sad. Right? Yeah. Their loved one is gone. But being able to sing the praises of a life well lived is really good. And I mean, for me, even when I go to those, I leave funerals thinking I want I want to be a better person. The things that were said about this person, I hope that something like that could be said about me. So then what do I need to do today? And so I think engaging in some of those conversations, I hope they will cause my children and me and other people to not just think about death, but to actually live better in light of the fact that we're all going to die.
To think about the legacy that we want to leave, right? Just like you said, what people will remember and what will they share?
Yeah.
We had an opportunity recently to serve a young man who decided before he died, he wanted to have one last party. And so he invited all of his friends and family. There were over 100 people that came out to the property. We've got a cottage out there, and people throughout the day just streamed in and out. And it was, for him, such an opportunity to really be loved on, you know, and to have all those people tell him what they meant, what he meant to them. It was a really wonderful send-off, and he got that before he died. And I think, oh, what a cool idea. I mean, more and more people, I think, are considering that when they know they have a terminal illness and will die. You know, have the celebration before. Let's talk about it. Let's try to be more open about this. Yes, it's sad, it's hard. And I'm going to just say one thing about that, especially as we go through holidays and we think about the firsts in a year as we miss somebody. Grief is hard. And grief is another thing at Quiet Oaks that we help people deal with. So when someone dies, we follow their family for 13 months beyond their passing. And allow ourselves the opportunity to stay connected and engaged and help support them through that. And grief work is hard work. That is hard.
Absolutely.
And it is work. Some people say, I remember meeting a woman during one of our fellowship groups who was grieving a husband during the Vietnam War that she had lost. And she said, I don't understand it. She said, I have waited all these years and I don't feel any different. It's like, well, that's because it's not just time heals wounds. They always say time heals all wounds. It's time and work. You got to do the work. And the work is, again, this thought and idea of leaning in. You got to lean in to get through it. That's the only way through grief is to do it.
Push through.
You have to go through it. And that means feeling the feelings and having the sadness. And I oftentimes share that idea of if we didn't love so much, we wouldn't grieve so much. We wouldn't feel sad about the loss if we didn't care so much.
They're
so
inversely related.
They are. They're like two sides of a coin that really are necessary in both halves. Grief journey is also part of what we deal with in hospice care. But I think that too is something people are afraid to talk about. We don't want to make someone sad, so we're not going to talk about their loved one. Guess what they want to talk about? Their loved one. That
It's the
has
only
meaning.
thing they're sitting there thinking about.
Yes, that's everything. So don't walk away from it, but instead ask that question because you will bring for them, maybe there will be a tear, but there will be a moment to share something that matters to them more than anything. So I want to encourage people to be able to have those conversations too.
My dad died in the last almost 3 years ago. And we actually shared a home, doing this kind of multi-generational living thing. And Cassie and I, my wife and I, shared a home with my parents. And the reason that we did it was, I started teasing my parents when I was 18 about someday we're going to live together again. I mean, this was like 9 years before he died. We were putting Christmas lights up on the house around Thanksgiving time. And he and I were joking about how someday we're going to live together. And we just kind of like stopped joking about it. And we just like had a real conversation. And this conversation was about like, if we think this is valuable someday, like why wouldn't we do it sooner? You know, like if this has a value someday, like we see that this will be good for us someday. Let's just bring the timeline forward and just see, does it still hold, does the idea still hold water? And so we went in the house and talked to my mom and my wife, and James was like my son was like a baby. I was 1. And within like 6 months, Cassie and I had sold our house and had moved in, and it was something that I knew would have value. And so I wanted more. I wanted more of that. I love my parents. They were fantastic parents. I want my kids to have more of that. And anyway, so I'm really thankful that I had the last 9 years of my dad's life, which if we hadn't done it then, like I would have never got that with him, because we were expecting, of course, somehow sneaks up on everybody, that it was, of course, with my dad, it was supposed to be much, much later. But because we did that early, we were able to like maximize that time together. Wow. But all of that to say, we're in a home with my mom. And so we're all grieving, after my dad dies. Our grief journeys are different. It's the kind of grief when you're grieving the loss of a parent is different than when you're grieving the loss of your spouse and partner and best friend. And so just me and my mom on similar and different grief journeys. And then in the middle of all of that are my kids. And this is the thing that I loved. So many questions after my dad died. How are you doing? And then always, how's your mom doing? You know, just people knowing that we're together. And so everyone checking up on my mom. And still to this day, I mean, I get asked probably multiple times a week, how's your mom doing? And they're asking in relationship to grief. I got to watch my kids do this really remarkable thing. There's this propriety that we have as adults. We overthink to ourselves sometimes, like, they've probably had to answer the question, how you doing? You know, like, your dad died last week, your dad died yesterday or 6 months, and you probably want, right? Don't you want kind of a break to not talk about it right now? And, like, we do this thing as adults where we're assuming for that person
Right.
that the right thing is actually silence.
Yeah.
And maybe it's true. Maybe it's true that sometimes that's the case. But what I know for sure is that our propriety as adults, we go too far in that.
Yes.
And watching kids who don't understand any of that, they don't have any of the social cues of like, give grandma, just like give her a little bit of space right now. She's grieving or whatever. And just them ignoring any sort of like literal or figurative barrier that might have been there for like, give grandma a little bit of space today. They can't read any of that.
Nope.
And so just to like push in and watch them love her and hug her and care for her in a kind of way that her son that adores her and wanted to be there for her. I couldn't have cared for my mom in the kind of way that I think she was cared for alone. And watching kiddos walk through grief, experience grief. I mean, they have their own, right? They have their own grief that they're dealing with.
Yeah.
But then just pushing into those little places that maybe as an adult, as the son,
feel comfortable
I didn't feel
or
comfortable
able.
always
Yeah.
pushing in. And just like watching them do that. And it was so encouraging to me. Legitimately, I learned so much about caring for a grieving person by watching watching my kids do that. And then also the thoughtful people who like cared for me in that. It's like, okay, these things that people are doing for me, I just need to remember. I need to remember those because this thing felt like $1 million. The way that you thought of me, the way that you thought of my family, honored my dad. Like I want to be a person that does that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But when you walk through grief, there's so much to learn about yourself and about the people around you.
No doubt. Kids, we can learn a lot from watching those kids.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that question, how are you? I mean, as long as we're willing to explore with someone their true feelings, because
That
what's
it's okay
the
to not
easy
be okay.
response?
I'm great.
Yeah,
Fine.
people say, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. Well, no, you're not fine. How could you be fine? You just lost the love of your life, this life partner of 50 years. How is that fine? But I think there's this standard expected response. So, but if we can really help people explore or open up to how are you really doing?
Yeah.
Because I know this can't be easy for you. And you're right. Sometimes it's just being there. It's not saying anything but being there, or like those kiddos just leaning in and giving a hug and just being present without having to say anything. I'm just here for you. Because it is so hard to go through that. You feel like you're doing it all alone, even though everyone grieves at some point in life and grieves different things. We lose and have pain that we grieve, but everybody does it in their own way. And that's something else we have to accept, that everyone's different. No two people grieve the same, and we have to respect that about each other and be there to help people through grief, because it is hard.
Yeah.
It is.
As you are with people in their last days, what are some consistent things that people say that they regret?
I think always there's this this love of others and family that comes and permeates over everything, and the really always cherishing that time spent, because it's this idea of, I wished I had more time, or I wish we could have done more, or had these moments, but really embracing every single moment that we do have. One thing I've learned over the years in hospice work is to be present. You've talked about that moment of being present. It's important just to be there. And I say we're terrible human beings because we have this desire always to be doing. It's hard for our patients who come to us and are lying on their deathbed without the ability to do, because they think they should be doing. If I'm not productive, if I'm not a productive member of society, then what am I? Who am I? And as well for caregivers to just be bedside and just be present, instead of feeling like I have to do something. I have to be caring for this person, or I have to go do this or do that, but just to be there. And sometimes it's hard to have stillness and calm to doing that. I think the regrets that people have sometimes are, the thinking that what if I had done that, or tried that, or explored that? The possibilities of the things that we left undone. So unfinished business is part of the reconciling. People spend time thinking about what maybe could have happened had they gone down that pathway or explored that. So I think to encourage people not to be afraid, to try to take chances and do things, live big. I think as kids get older, we start to see there's this joy in children, this really the abandon they live their lives with without concern or care about anybody's thoughts or worries until all of a sudden somebody gives them an attitude or impression where they have to second guess themselves and think about, well, maybe I shouldn't have sang that song in front of everyone or acted out and done this crazy or whatever. But just to lean in and live life that way. And lean in, I think it's kind of a common phrase of things we've said today, but leaning into life and living it to the fullest. One year we had a fundraiser and the theme was dessert first. So the fundraiser, the gala started out with everyone seated at tables in memory of loved ones, and it was the favorite dessert of their loved one. And then the encouragement of eating dessert before you do the rest. So embracing the good things, not waiting to put out the china or wear the special outfit or do the special trip or take the special time for something, but do it. Don't have your regrets by saying, I wished I'd have done that. Putting it all on the table and going for it. That would be my thought. Yeah.
Any notable bedside confessions that you guys have navigated at Quiet Oaks? Obviously without any names or anything like that. Anything that you guys have had to walk through?
There have been a few things that have come up. Whether we could ever determine, a lot of times it had to do with, a family legacy, ancestry, who belonged to who had a child, whose child was somebody else's child. Like there was some of these things that have come up over the years. I think a lot of times when I have the memories of what I cherish and hold dear, it's of those people who have a request of something yet, where we do something special and we can have these final moments of special memories. Not so much out of a confession, but more out of something I wished maybe I could do yet. And so things like we had a woman who loved gambling and she wanted very much to go one last time to the casino, but she was not well enough to do that. So instead, her friends brought a bus. She loaded the bus. They took her around town, and while she was out cruising around this big city of St. Augusta, brought in some slot machines into our little cottage. And when they brought her back, she came in and got to spend the afternoon doing slots at Quiet Oaks. And she said it was the best day ever. Opportunities to bring out the Shetland ponies and have grandma watch her grandkids get to ride those ponies. Having someone roasting marshmallows outside their window, bedbound, can't get out of bed, but nurses fashioned long sticks so that they could roast marshmallows outside the window and make s'mores one last time. Riding in fancy cars, one last ride in a fancy car. The opportunity to have a special date with a loved one, anniversary, kind of reenacting and remembering their first and bringing that about to a last. Special sharing of meals. And, there's a lot of things we do at Quiet Oaks for modalities of comfort that we try to incorporate in. So music therapy, massage therapy, we have pet therapy. That's always a special thing. I think some of those things are comforts that we can apply and bring to bear at different stages throughout this end of life journey. And they're really special, special techniques that we use for comfort.
Linda, how can people get involved? You said it's a nonprofit. I know that there's tons of volunteer opportunities. There's ways to give and serve. Maybe just tell us a little bit about how people could be.
People can check out the Quiet Oaks website, which is just quietoakshospicehouse.org, and there is a volunteer tab. And people can come out. They can help cook in the kitchen. We serve home-cooked meals to our residents and their families.
Really delicious food.
Yes, we have a great partnership with area businesses that support the work that we do. Costco is one of those local providers I give a shout out to because they're always providing excess. And that's nice for us to be able to have some of those meals help defray our budget and our expenses. We have volunteers who help the nursing staff, people who work behind the scenes, people who help in the gardens and the grounds. keep things beautiful. There's so many different ways to get involved. I always say, if you can think it, we can use you. We can find a way to use you. We are a nonprofit, but we are a business. So anything business related, advertising, marketing, the things that people do, fundraising, those are all other ways that people can be involved and participate. So they can go to that website and we can help get them hooked up and connected if they're interested.
Well, Linda, I'm thankful. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Yeah.
This is a different kind of conversation than we often have here, but
Yeah.
I think it's important. And I think that we should have more conversations in general in our lives about these good and hard things.
Yeah.
Because it's a way that we can show that we love our families and that we care about the people that we'll eventually leave behind.
I couldn't agree more. I agree. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah. So in closing, we always do an unpaid ad. Is there someone, something, or some idea that you think deserves a little shout out today?
Well, I'm going to put the challenge out for everybody to do their healthcare directive.
Great.
So if they haven't completed a healthcare directive, I think that is something that I'd like to encourage listeners to do. It's simple. It's easy. They can go to the Quiet Oaks website to get a copy of one. We have staff and resources that would help facilitate that. I love the idea of random acts of kindness. And the next time you're in line waiting for your coffee, go ahead and pay it forward for somebody behind you and see how that can sort of spur the action of taking off and making someone's day a little brighter. So just a little food for thought there. Random acts of kindness.
That's sweet.
Yeah.
I'm going to jump in with a similar-ish one for my unpaid ad for the day. Mine's for life insurance. It's
Okay.
in a similar kind of way. It's one of those things that we don't like to think about, but it's something that, I mean, a term life policy, if you're young-ish, they're not, I mean, as far as insurance goes, it's an inexpensive kind of insurance. And it's a way that we can have a hard conversation now that actually is really loving to the people that you're trying to kind of protect and serve.
Good idea.
And so, especially, parents with young families and stuff, it's an easy thing to do. And I think you should do it.
Love it.
Awesome. Well,
All
Linda,
right.
thanks for coming on. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. My pleasure.